Do you think techno could expand its range more, or people's understanding of its range, if it were embraced in concept more than it usually is, beyond the music, in other words?
Well, I think that it really has a lot to do with how tolerant the people are for listening to things that they're not quite familiar with. How tolerant the media is to report something on something that isn't the agenda of the month or what is trendy at that time. And it involves patience for someone to just listen to something where they're not quite sure what the outcome is going to be. It takes those things to happen for something to evolve. And I mean, you can have an army of producers making very innovative music, but if no one takes the time to really listen to it and then acknowledge it and say, hey, there's something very special about it, then we really have no chance. This is what I know has happened, for house music to disco, to techno, so I think it's a very important event that has to happen, I think, is acknowledgement.
And with respect to trying to place techno somewhere in between art and entertainment, I wondered if you thought contemporary art in general today was inherently a form of entertainment, and if so, does that leave the door open for techno to be considered a very contemporary art form?
Well, if you compare the two, I mean, they're both vehicles and means for one to be able to communicate. It's if you look at a painting and you listen to electronic techno composition, the intent is generally the same. I mean, someone chose to use blue paint instead of gray, or someone chose to play certain keys, black keys, as opposed to white keys. I mean, there is intent there in both situations, and so it's the process of someone trying to communicate through a format, and I think that they actually are basically the same. I mean, it's basically the same. When you break them down, it's just a form of communication. So, entertainment is one application. Education is also another one. Education and awareness, and many other applications as well.
Also, I guess, with respect to that answer, what do you say to those who want to engage with the music, but not necessarily with the concept?
In terms of conceptual?
I guess in terms of, conceptual. For those who want to engage with techno music, but not necessarily the concept that's starting to emerge here that you have to offer for techno.
Well, the thing is that, I mean, when you really break it down, any effort to communicate through sound or through color or through any type of format is conceptual, actually. Some are more defined than others. Some are more detailed than others. But, I mean, when someone makes a composition, whether it be trance music or drum and bass or techno or house or whatever, and they give it a name, there is an idea behind it. I mean, if there wasn't, then there would be no reason to give it a title, or there would be no reason to only make it, at the time limit that it's at, 5 minutes as opposed to 15 minutes. There is some structure. It's just undeveloped concepts, basically, is what it is. So it's when someone has an idea and they make the transition from what they think to their fingers to the keyboard to capturing it on tape or CD, there is a concept there.
And as we, assuming that at this point that techno is more than just music to you, as techno music is often heard, So that, in other words, techno may be a theory or maybe a way of life or whatever the case. What else would you say that techno is in order to relate your feelings to us? Is it architecture? Is it like a theme that runs through a book? Or is it too much to call it a philosophy? How far are you willing to stretch the comparisons?
My experience, it changes. The form of it changes for what it actually I can basically describe anything or use electronic music or techno as a format to exert any type of idea or any type of feeling. For example, I just finished a project called The Healing Channel, and it's using electronic music as a therapy, actually. So using the same equipment, the same drum machines, the same keyboards that I would normally make a track for someone to dance to on the night, using that same equipment to make something that creates a very gyrating massage type of sound for completely different application. So it really depends on what I need it for. It's kind of like an all-purpose type of format. I never really thought of it as a structured tool where I can't bend it to serve my purpose. So it's always been like that from the beginning. I never looked at it as something that I go to, but something that I kind of create around me and the most techno thing about everything is, the most techno thing about the music that I make is actually not in the keyboards or the machines that I use, but it's actually more in the idea of it itself. So I never really relied on particular sound or a particular keyboard or one that does a particular thing, because I'm shaping the sound for my need.
Mm-hmm. So then, how did something that I think what I'm understanding is it has such a mutability, maybe an elasticity to it. Do you feel that it's chosen a very rigid path in a short-term history, or?
No, I think it. I suppose rigid. I suppose that would probably be maybe the first 4 years. I suppose. Not the first 4 years, but maybe the late 80s to the mid 90s, I suppose. And it was rigid because it was the era of acid house and the era of heavy drugs, of ecstasy, and the very circus-like atmosphere of electronic music. And it was rigid because you at times have situations where young people are doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. So you have the authorities and city officials and the police trying to control the situation. So it was rigid because of that. But through the 90s, it began to take on a much wider form, and people begin to not rebel, but they were interested in producing music in another direction. So shortly after Acid House, a very short phase came where people were producing very intellectual type of electronic music, and groups like Black Dog and Aphex Twin, and a lot of groups from the UK and things from Germany were actually coming in. It was more towards art form and tinkering with machines and modifications and things like that, and things became a little bit more stabilized. The whole party scene became a little bit more settled. The structure of the whole industry in Europe and outside of America became a little bit more form came about, and it became easier to travel around countries and play music for people and perform and things like that. So.
And when you speak also of, I guess, the way in which, you know, you're able to apply techno to far beyond, say, a studio setting or DJ, far beyond the context of music, really. I think, do you see that as a future for maybe people who aren't even making, for techno in general, for it to expand beyond a musical form,
yeah, for it
to have other avenues it can go, considering it is meant to be about immutability and willingness to explore.
I think
try things.
It really has to do with something that I believe it really has to do with how other things influence a younger generation of people outside of music. How a younger generation grows up and what their influences are, and how the world and everything in the world is really affecting them, actually. And I think as they grow up, as they become older, they have a certain view on life, I think. For me, I mean, I grew up in the 60s. It was a very turbulent time, especially here in Detroit. You know, riots in Chicago, riots in Detroit, Watts riots. The civil rights movement. So I can remember, the army coming into Detroit and stabilizing the whole city, and there was fires, just like one block away. And my parents thought it was too dangerous, and they took us to Montreal, to Canada at that time, because it was just too violent to be here in the city. And at the time, I don't know if it was just by coincidence, but it was actually Expo in Montreal, 1967. And while all this was happening here in Detroit, I was being exposed to how people were actually dreaming about what tomorrow would be like. And we stayed there for maybe 2 weeks until things calmed down here, and then they brought us back here to Detroit, I mean, just growing up in that era and watching how the city kind of recovered from that and the state that it's in now, and watching the automobile industry kind of decline and then stabilize, and what's left from, what remnants are left from that era, and listening to the ideas of what people plan to do to kind of fix it and patch it up and move on from here. Those growing up in these type of eras, it shapes a particular type of character, and I suppose all of us, the techno community here in Detroit, we have similarities. We grew up. Most of us grew up in this era. So deep down within ourselves, there are similarities, and probably the same reasons why we make music the same way or very similar ways, or why we have such an urge to want to leave the city of Detroit and kind of bring the sound with us and show other people what it's like, or what we kind of experienced, the type of people that we are, so I would think that the same thing would happen to a younger generation, and that will kind of shape what the music will be like, what they'll use, what they will find interest in, the type of messages they'll put in the music. And I think that's generally how it works throughout time.
And I mean, you were just talking about being in a situation where you had people thinking about tomorrow, and I think in a simple form, if not too simplistic, I think of techno as being a series of guesses about tomorrow, and thinking about there is that emphasis on tomorrow, and I think there have been generations of people who have grown up thinking about tomorrow with the 21st century being a sort of a benchmark maybe of that thought process. Now that we're here, do you think people, maybe younger people, are still thinking about tomorrow? Or is it a different process?
I want to say yes, but honestly, I would probably have to say no. I mean, I think that the world, has become more complex. It's a very complex world that we all live in today, and I think the average young person is exposed to so many, much more harsher things in life, I think. I mean, when you turn on the news and you listen to just the nightly news and, the things that you hear like in 1 week, I mean, within 24 hours or, it can just be drastically different. After a while, it really shapes one's character and how one views the world. And I've always just kind of discovered that it's hard to get people to discuss the future. Actually, I've always found that it's hard to get in conversations with people about the future and what they think the future may be like. It's almost to a certain extent where people find it kind of disturbing to discuss. Whether some people want not to kind of make a prediction and then it doesn't happen, or maybe some people may have views on the future that maybe it's too bleak, or I find that people are not as optimistic in these days than, I suppose, maybe in the 90s, I suppose. I've always found it difficult, and even through making music, I find it difficult for people to really accept a concept or a story or some type of idea that takes place in the future, and the music is actually asking the listener to kind of imagine the situation or the scenario.